Queen was constitutionally required to remain above politics, remain politically impartial, and she was very, very good at it. I can think perhaps 4 or 5 occasions on which she let the mask slip. Tony Blair said, I was Prime Minister for 12 years and I still have no idea what the Queen's real views are. King Charles takes the throne and uniquely we know exactly what he thinks on almost all the major issues of the day. The signals he's been sending since the Queen's death, he will abide by the constitutional requirement to remain politically impartial. But he's got a short fuse, he's quite headstrong, he's got a messianic streak about him, and he feels deeply, deeply, deeply about the causes that he's embraced.
In terms of how environmental Charles actually is, he's been a hugely important figure, a hugely important public spokesperson for climate and nature, but that doesn't mean he's perfect. On the upside, he's shown that traditional conservative thinking can go hand in hand with climate advocacy, and that's so important at a time when there's a big push within the Tory party and the Tory government to slow action on climate change. He's made big speeches on climate change in diplomatic settings. He's lobbied government ministers on everything from illegal fishing to energy efficiency.
If we are to restore the critical balance between people and planet, we need to protect, restore and invest in nature.
On the other side, his environmentalism is also, you could argue, not as revolutionary as perhaps he's made out. Only 6% of the land in his Duchy of Cornwall is wooded, compared to 13% nationally and actually 38% in Europe. So much he can do better on his own environmental stewardship on a direct level. And then things like the initiatives he's set up with business leaders where they've made pledges called terracotta pledges to kind of become more sustainable. There's still so much that needs to be done to actually deliver on those promises.
He's always wanted a role in life. He's spent his first 30 years searching for one. He finally found it, which was championing causes which at the time were not fashionable, be they social or environmental. And I think he's very proud of what he's done. And I think he feels vindicated and emboldened by the way, for instance, that climate change, when he started talking about it 50 years ago, he was regarded as dotty in his own words. Now it's very mainstream and he's taken the credit. And he's going to want to carry on championing those causes. That's his raison d'etre.
Your Majesty.
So if Liz Truss comes to him and seeks royal assent for a bill that dilutes the commitment to net zero by 2050, for example, it doesn't have to be on the environment. It could be a bill that jettisons the Northern Irish Protocol and endangers the Good Friday Agreement. What is he going to do? I mean, the first thing he'll do is, in private, he will use his access to the Prime Minister, his weekly audience, to very forcefully argue against it, I suspect, to press his case. But if the Prime Minister doesn't listen, if she proceeds with her plans, and she's fairly doctrinaire as well, what gives? Does he give royal assent to a bill with which he obviously and profoundly disagrees? He's already signalled quite strongly that he will use Prince William, the new Prince of Wales, to make speeches on the causes that they both embrace, conservation in the environment.
So will William do it? Will he take on the green mantle and extend it? There are signs that is happening. In the Jubilee speeches in the summer, it was actually William's speeches, not Charles, that focused on environment and nature. And many have read that as a sign of Charles saying, no, I have to step back now from talking about some of this so publicly, and you have to step forward. So in terms of how green William actually is, I currently tend to think of him as a kind of greyish green. He says a lot of really positive things, but they all feel a bit safe, almost a bit kind of what a focus group might have told him to say. So things like he enjoyed climbing trees as a kid, which isn't exactly groundbreaking.
In the aftermath of the COP26 conference, it is clear that we must see the environment, conservation and climate change through the same prism and not in isolation.
And on the flip side, him and Kate keep investments from their royal charity, their royal foundation, in a bank that has huge ties to the fossil fuel industry. In terms of his personal connection with nature, there was photos of him taking his son George grouse shooting, which is a highly controversial sport in terms of the management of the land that it's done on. There's a lot of actual practical action that they could still improve on. And they will need to do that because there is still a gap between even what someone like Charles and William are advocating for and what actually needs to happen in terms of climate action and reducing global emissions. And so William is going to have to really step up and go even further than his father. To live up to his father's green legacy, he's going to have to surpass it. I think there might be no better way for the monarchy to ensure its future with the kind of young voters who are William's contemporaries and even younger than him, than by standing up for the climate and nature and the planet.
He's got to justify the monarchy. He's got to make it relevant. And one way of doing that is by talking out on causes that people care about. On the other hand, if he goes too far, if he strays into partisan politics, the monarchy will be seen as interfering, controversial, divisive, because every issue nowadays is heavily politicized. We live in a deeply polarized country. Even climate change is heavily politicized. So if he goes too far, he risks undermining the monarchy, and he might end up as Charles III and Charles the Last.